is Lutheran. And they fight over sort of major spoils in the Hessian land, including the university. And when one side gets it, the other one gets a new patent to found a new university. And the ideas about public law and the nature of the empire and states end up kind of correlating these two universities with the alignment of the state in which the university itself finds itself. So that's one example. I mean, and then there are other more subtle things like, you know, the growth of what's called the historical school of law. This is in Göttingen in the late 18th century, associated with Puter, originally Stefan Puter, and he starts to really become famous for this by about 1780, 1785. So there certainly are schools, and I know about them and I've kind of recognized them in a broad qualitative sense, but I don't have a track of that yet.
So this is a certain historical, well, just based on your knowledge of the history of things that you're seeing borne out in the networks that are being drawn up?
You're asking where they get the examples that I just gave you, or?
Right.
Yes, in this case, this is not something that I figured out from this work that I've showed you so much as from myself reading over lots and lots of primary sources. So, yeah. Yes.
Thank you very much for the talk. I have two questions. One is, so prosopography is a very old subject. So how many of the 3,000 people do you find in, say, the prosopography catalog of the Bavarian State Library or the Hesse State Library or something, where you have probably hundreds of thousands of people?
Probably third, I guess, something like that. So all the authors, Old German, the ADB and the NDB, these two biographical sets of volumes, and prosopographical databases have a lot of information, but it's fairly, well, it's useful for this kind of thing. It's like, was a professor at so-and-so time, married so-and-so, like that level of information. Sometimes those are digitized, but they're not structured data, they're not semantic data, they're just full text that can be searched at best at this point.
They published it as linked data a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, but then being structured like this is the person, this is like a marriage relation, like that.
No, the problem is, I think, is like way less information. So the question two would be how to feed that back. Because obviously there is, digital working people. There's a lot of people. Right? There's 20,000 PhDs in Germany a year, probably a significant percentage of the humanities people doing the database. Because in the past, with the carbon disease, right, everybody ran around with a little wooden box, and now we run around with like databases. And the question is. So one product is the PhD, is the book, right, which we publish, and the other question is like, if you have such a database, how do you feed that back to a broader community? Which is a really, really good question.
So this is why I bring up the question of interoperability of databases. I think that to my mind, there are two major approaches to interoperable data. One of which is to try to form consensus around a new standard that everybody will start to use. The problem with that is that you risk just creating yet another standard, and something that nobody really subscribes to. They just do this the N+1 data standard. And the other approach is to try to write programs that basically can look at a given database and make a good guess that certain categories constitute people, some certain categories constitute texts, and other, again, if not actually universal categories themselves, then say, in comparison, looking at database 1, it looks like these fields correspond to the other things that I'm looking at in database 2. So it's sort of like building lots of little British-monk databases instead. One way or the other, there's not only are the huge book projects like Google and the Bavarians and the Anglo-Saxons, but also, and there's a whole lot more of that stuff, but there's just lots and lots and lots of siloed data as well. So many historians and social scientists have this. And you want to talk about the amount of information existing in the world. Well, it's not just full text, but it's also information that we as scholars collect and then sits in our little files someplace, becomes part of our estate. It doesn't get that much use. So you want to find a way to publish it, but also a way to make it interoperable with other people's data at the same time. People are interested in this. They want to do it. It's a matter of progress in the field.
I kind of put together some of the different moving parts, if you will, of the talk. And so I had a question about the first part and then trying to put that together with the second. So my question about the first part is about the Treaty of Westphalia and Westphalian sovereignty, and to what extent that might be a way of thinking about the shifting property relations that are at stake and also the power of the state. So if the state is more invested in adjudicating the relations or the relations and property ownership. Is that in any way the product of new notions of state territorial sovereignty that are articulated out of the Treaty of Westphalia following the 30 Years' War? And in addition to that, I'm interested in the question of the commons. I mean, I guess, really coming from a Anglo-American field, the issue of the enclosure of the commons becomes so important in the articulation of property relations in the 17th and 18th century in England. So I'm wondering about the territorial sovereignty, the enclosure of the commons, and this new notion of the, or maybe strengthened notion of the denizen/citizen. It was interesting that you kind of modulated between those terms because, and I take it to be that's partly because there's a shift going on between denizenship and citizenship that is at stake. And then the second part of the question is just trying to plug that into the digital humanities part of the talk and thinking about what kind of, I guess my question is about causality, how one might read causality into the distinction between modes of scholastic knowledge and the movement towards Enlightenment knowledge that is demonstrated in the more localized production of text. And I wonder if that, if there's a story that is related to increased state authority as opposed to, let's say, the authority of the Holy Roman Empire in relationship to earlier texts. I'm just speculating, but I guess my question is really, is there, how do you connect the first, are there ways in which the findings in the first half of your talk speak directly to those in the second half?
So those are two very good questions that I think I can. So to answer your first question, and this is not a novum that I've come up with, but it's part of sort of the literature about the effects of Westphalia on the German would-be states, like these political entities, some would become states, is that they strengthen the power of the territorial rulers, and they basically give them the ability to essentially kind of clamp down on the strength and resistance of the nobilities. I mean, I had to skip a lot of detail here, but there is, in France there's the Fronde, in England there's the Civil War, which is in part an aristocratic rebellion in part. In the Germanies, like in Hesse and Hildesheim and other areas in Prague, I think there are noble revolts, basically, or noble conflicts with would-be absolutist princes, to make it very simple. And the prince, Wilhelm VI, the Presse-Council, he's the landgrave of the prince in the 1650s, for instance. He is interested, he and his government are interested both from the perspective of kind of public peace, like settling disputes between people, but also from the point of view of the prince being the major domain lord that tries to collect dues and in-kind contributions as essentially a high landlord over lots of large pieces of territory. He has a specific fiscal and also public interest, both fiscal and public interest in the maintenance of order and the kind of the creation of good operating rules at the local level for how property disputes work. And to some extent, this is simply aligned. We could just call it a happy coincidence in which there's an alignment of that interest with, if they're against the nobility, so to speak, because the nobles challenge princely power, then the way to weaken noble power at the local level is for the state to, if you like, sort of glom onto or kind of pay attention to and try to adjudicate and help and protect the individuals who would otherwise be under noble control. You can see why this is a fairly familiar story. And this is the frame through which I understand why the state and state operators like these jurists and these judges create and use the legal categories that they do. I'm not trying to say that state is the sort of the sole kind of cause here. I think that's just true reductionist and monocausal, but that frame does help explain why the legal and intellectual creations move sort of in the direction that they do, like why they're aligned with certain state interests. As far as the digital humanities side of this goes and the methods that I'm trying to use, I mean, hopefully you see the connection between the growth of ideas that I'm talking about, and ideas and texts in the first half of the talk, and then why the digital humanities tool is useful for trying to track those on a large aggregate. But that's not your question. Your question is sort of the state side, so to speak, of the book project, right? Like the state context and how that connects to the digital humanities.
Yeah, Yeah, I mean, I guess if the first part of the narrative is about the way in which property rights change, and that property rights change, I mean, your argument is that property rights are, as far as I understand, are kind of a driver for new articulation of political rights.
Yeah.
And so then the question is, do you see any story about property rights and political rights in the kind of publication data that you're looking at? And so I guess I was sort of trying to put that into a larger framework that might encompass both around the new versions of state sovereignty that might have a sort of causal force in both stories. But I'm speculating.
I don't know.
Just,
I honestly don't know about that. I
Yeah.
have to give it some more thought. Maybe we can talk about this more later. Because nothing's coming to my mind in that direction, but maybe I'm just not quite understanding what you mean by it. So, yes.
I have kind of sort of a polemic question. The Republic of Letters is one of the most famous digital humanities projects at Stanford. Gets a lot of press, and the Republic of Letters describes the exchange of letters of Voltaire and his friends, and actually was used by the people at that time. So, by the crowd of enlightened people who exchange letters. So your title of the talk seems to allude to that. What is the Republic of Literature?
So it's a fanciful term that I made up to play on the idea of the Republic of Letters. The Republic of Letters project at Stanford, as you rightly pointed out, is essentially about correspondence networks and it's across all of Europe. But what